Is cheating a disease? Because I don't understand how you can ruin a full and happy life while being sane. My wife manipulated me and thought that I, naive, would not divorce her. But in the end, her self-confidence quickly went down when she faced serious problems. If you had asked me yesterday about my marriage, I would have replied affirmatively with a smile. Heck, even if you'd asked me this morning at breakfast, my answer would have been the same. Every day I'd come home and pinch myself just to make sure I wasn't dreaming. I'd do a quick check. Job, fulfilling and enjoyable, check. House, spacious and fully paid off, check. Bank account, healthy and steadily growing, check. Wife, attractive, loyal, reciprocating devotion. Kids, a boy and a girl, aged 15 and 14 respectively. Life couldn't have been better. But the problem is, it's not yesterday or this morning anymore. It's right here, right now, 2:33 p.m. today. And everything has just gone downhill. Big time. Standing in the living room on the ground floor, I couldn't help feeling extremely perplexed. I heard very suspicious noises. I knew I wasn't feeling well. That's why I got home 3 hours earlier than usual. And yet, why did I hear my wife having fun? Feeling sick, I climbed the stairs and cautiously looked into the master bedroom. Normally, the sight of my attractive wife would have pleased me, but I was too unwell and confused to react normally. I knew that my wife was very fond of bed intimacy. We still did it at least 3 times a week, even after 17 years of marriage. And sure enough, Donna was lying on our bed. Forgetting about my discomfort for a while, I watched her slender figure. She was lying down and her arms were down. Normally it would have been a very attractive scene, but today it was quite the opposite. You see, the layout of the bedroom allowed me to look at our bed from the side, which allowed me to see the movie she was watching. I, like anyone else, like adult entertainment. But it was this film that made me feel disappointed and confused. It wasn't because Donna was playing the female lead, but rather because I wasn't the male lead. I quickly dismissed the idea that the film had been shot before me. Donna certainly didn't look 17 years younger on screen. I watched my wife cheat on me in this movie. I vaguely noticed that the bed on the screen and the bed under my wife in real time are the same thing. My brain couldn't handle any of these sights, so my eyes automatically left the bed and the screen. They fell on the bottom drawer of Donna's dresser, absurdly pushed all the way out. Without being distracted, or rather spurred on by the views in front of me, my stomach remembered why he had come home early. I went with him to the bathroom and bowed to the great porcelain goddess. As I passed the bed, I heard a loud, "Oh shit."
I just experienced a second moment of pleasure without taking my eyes off the screen by the bed. And again, I tried to remember the man's name. Was it Jeff or Jed? Something like that? After all, it's been more than 3 years. Suddenly, I felt someone's presence next to the bed, although I didn't see or hear anything. When I opened my eyes, I caught a glimpse of Dave slipping into the bathroom. The pleasure faded into oblivion, replaced by a deep sense of sadness and remorse. I have carefully planned and worked to ensure that this day never comes. I was so convinced that this wasn't going to happen that I didn't even think about what to do or say. All I could do now was wait for my dear husband to come out of the bathroom. As he emerged, I rose from my seat, studying his expression for any signs of reaction. Apart from a hint of confusion, his face remained inscrutable. I caught him glancing behind me. Oh no, I forgot to turn off the video. I hadn't intended to confront him with my mistake like that. I attempted to intervene as he brushed past me towards the bedroom door. He shoved me onto the bed with force, leaving me shocked. Dave had always been gentle and had never behaved like this before. I was too slow to prevent him from descending the stairs into the basement guest room. I heard the door lock as he shut himself in. Just then, my phone alarm rang, reminding me to pick up the kids from school. Putting aside the urgent need to address the situation with my marriage, I hurried off to my usual task. It didn't take long, and soon I was back home. The basement door remained locked, and my knocks went unanswered. The kids were puzzled by my obvious anxiety and odd behavior. When they inquired about it, I explained that their dad had returned home early and for some reason had locked himself in the basement. Kate, our youngest child, knocked on the door leading to the basement and called out for her father. The door creaked open slightly, leading to a hushed conversation. Kate returned shortly after. Dad mentioned he's feeling unwell and prefers not to risk getting us sick. He'll be staying in the basement until he feels better. He also mentioned not to worry about making dinner for him. I then kept myself occupied by preparing food for the hungry teenagers. If you haven't been around teens, you might not understand just how much they can eat. Dave once quipped that if there wasn't any food in the pantry after school, the kids would likely devour the pantry door itself. By 9:30, Dave still hadn't emerged when the kids went to bed. With no more distractions, I decided to confront the situation. Instead of risking embarrassment by seeking attention, I looked for a key in the kitchen. Fortunately, I found one that worked. Turning on the light in the basement, I was met with a foul odor. Concerned, I wondered if Dave was unwell, which would explain his early return. Dave lay on the bed, facing away from me, looking pale and weak. This was a stark contrast to the man I knew. A bucket nearby contained vomit. I cleaned it and returned to find Dave unchanged. My heart immediately empathized with him. How could I have caused pain to this kind man? He had shown me affection for nearly 2 decades, fulfilling my desires and showering me with care. A wonderful husband and father figure, he was the epitome of support in our close-knit community. Not only did he coach our children's soccer teams long after their interest waned, but he also mentored fatherless boys in our neighborhood. Our home was always filled with children he welcomed warmly, often neglecting our garden to assist single women in need. His selflessness was undeniable. How could I have caused him harm? Consumed by guilt, I sat on the bed, leaned over, and kissed him. He didn't respond, but his eyes were open. I desperately tried to explain what he had witnessed. I deeply apologize, Dave. I should have confided in you earlier, but I was afraid of risking our marriage. I waited for Dave to acknowledge my presence, but there was no response, no turn of his head to face me. I made a mistake 3 years ago, dear. When you were away for a week, I went to that bar on the outskirts of town with Janet. We struck up a conversation with 2 travelers, 2 men. They bought us drinks, and we were having a good time. It all seemed harmless. I know I should have left when Janet did, but I foolishly stayed. I paused, carefully choosing my words, sensing the need to lessen the pain. I tried to call a taxi to go home, but they told me that I would have to wait an hour. The man who stayed with me offered to give me a ride home, and I stupidly agreed, being drunk. He took another bottle of wine and brought me here. I felt grateful, so when we arrived, I invited him in. Oh, Dave, I think he put something in my wine. He became very persistent, and I couldn't resist. He took me to our bedroom. At that time, I didn't even realize that it was wrong, and I didn't feel guilty. He left only when the children returned home. I had to sneak him out the back door. I hesitated, holding back tears. The next day, a DVD with a note appeared in the mailbox. That jerk must have secretly recorded us. The note threatened to reveal everything if I didn't agree to sleep with him when he was in town. You'd be proud of me, Dave. I exposed his bluff and told him to go to hell. I never heard from him again. I saved the DVD intending to tell you the truth, but then I realized how stupid it was of me to go to that bar at all. I changed my mind, but I never bothered to throw the DVD away. Dave's expression was unreadable. He remained motionless. Well, about a month ago, I found this DVD and watched it. Strangely enough, I liked it. I forgot how awkward I was at that moment, and I only remembered how exciting it was. I am ashamed to admit that I have done this several times in the last month. Will you ever be able to forgive me, Dave? Finally, Dave moved. He turned abruptly, leaned over the edge of the bed, and buried his head in the bucket. I ran my fingers through the hair at the back of his neck as he emptied his stomach. Poor thing. Is there anything I can do for you? While his head remained in the bucket, I witnessed his left hand feeling around the bedside cabinet. Discovering the handle of the bottom drawer, he yanked it open. I was struck with horror as I saw what seemed to be the entirety of my DVD collection, all 27 of them. He must have retrieved them while I was on the school run, from their hiding spot beneath the bottom drawer of my dresser. I suddenly felt the urge to vomit. Terrified, I rushed out of the room. As I fled, I noticed Dave rolling into his usual position facing the wall. It wasn't until later that I realized I had left the door key on the bathroom sink. In a state of utter panic, I was completely clueless about what to do next. I had worsened my mistake of betraying my husband by blatantly lying to him. I couldn't fathom how I would survive this ordeal. Wait, I'll call my best friend Janet. She always knows how to handle these situations. Fortunately, she picked up on the fourth ring. Janet, you have to help me. Dave found all my DVDs this afternoon, and he's furious. Damn it, Donna. I warned you. It was foolish to record all your affairs and stash them with your shows. And I explained to you, Janet, that I was only doing this for Dave. This meant that I didn't have to look for a new boyfriend every month. Watching movies after that helped me, if you understand me, to relieve tension. If it wasn't for the movies, I'd have to go to the bar every week. It's not Dave's fault that he couldn't keep up with me when I started needing intimacy all the time 3 years ago. Oh, Janet, it's only getting worse. He came home early and found me watching one of the videos where I cheat on him. I tried to pretend it was just a one-time thing, but he had already found all the other discs. He must have found the place where I hid them when he caught me. Donna, please tell me that you got rid of the DVD that I was on. That would upset me too. I couldn't believe how selfish she was. Don't worry, Janet. I promised I'd get rid of him, and I did. He doesn't know about sloppy seconds, does he? Come on, Janet. It only happened a couple of times when I couldn't say no to Dave after another affair. Although, I have to admit, they were exciting, and these are some of my favorite videos. But it was more in your line than mine. What do you think Dave will do, Donna? I'm just uncertain, Janet. That's why I called you. Well, Donna, I believe you have him in a tough spot. He can't divorce you without admitting you've been unfaithful for 3 years. If that gets out, he'll become the town's laughingstock. No, Donna, he won't say a word. He has too much pride at stake. If he tries to opt for a no-fault divorce, you can always suggest that you'll spread the word. That would devastate him. No, Janet, I couldn't do that, I don't think. I'll have to swallow my pride for a while and hope he comes around. I can't bear to lose him. I love him too much. All right, Donna, start buttering him up. Just remember not to involve me in all of this. It could really complicate things for me and Reg. Talk to you tomorrow, girlfriend. Okay, until tomorrow. Bye, Janet. Right before I hung up the phone, I caught a masculine voice saying, Yeah, bye, Janet. I had forgotten about the extension in the basement, hadn't I? Frantically trying to recall everything I'd said in the past 10 minutes, I collapsed onto the bed, sobbing. What have I done? I knew I had always been able to manipulate Dave easily, but I sensed this time would be different. Our effortless communication would be absent. I reassured myself with the thought that none of this was my fault, and I had done everything possible to minimize disrespect toward Dave. He should appreciate that I had restrained my impulses discreetly. I just needed to make him understand. My thoughts went back to just over 3 years ago, about 2 weeks after my 43rd birthday. Everything I shared with Dave earlier was mostly true. Well, almost. The first step to creating tension in my marriage occurred when he was away for a week. Janet came up to me that day, and our conversation turned to the topic of bed life, which eventually led to extramarital affairs. Janet said that for many years she had been looking for solace outside of marriage. I didn't realize at the time that her motives were very different from what I might have had. It seemed that her partner, Reg, lacked interest and skill in bed. Lost in my own thoughts, I was thinking about my husband, Dave. He and I had a full-fledged bed life. Mindful of our friendship, I took my mind off my dreams and focused on Janet's words. Without much prompting, she talked about her method of getting pleasure by visiting a bar on the outskirts of the city in the afternoon. It was a time when traveling salesmen used to visit the bar to relax. Janet chose a goal for herself and spent the afternoon looking for satisfaction. Despite the fact that she had been doing this for 2 years, her husband never managed to catch her. Despite the differences between her situation and mine, I found myself mentally leaning towards cheating. To satisfy my growing desires, I decided to follow Janet's example, but with a few changes. Instead of going to the men's motel rooms, I brought them home. I reasoned like this. If I can record these meetings, then I can watch these recordings later while Dave is not at home. I may need to do it just once to make the dreams that have accumulated over the years come true. As Janet continued to talk, I thought about my plan, and the more my desire grew, I had it all planned out in my mind. Using my day off would simplify things. If I could arrange for the kids to be elsewhere after school, I'd have 3 to 4 hours before Dave returned home. Our bedroom offered plenty of hiding spots for a camera. Now, in the bleak present, I reflected on the risks I had taken. For the first time, I questioned whether seeking help might have been a better choice than acting on my impulses. 2 days later, when Janet mentioned going on another expedition, I didn't hesitate. Everything I told Dave the first time was true, except for the part about illegal substances and blackmail. The initial experience had been exhilarating, and the recording remained one of my favorites. However, it hadn't sustained me for years, just barely 7 weeks. Still, it beat going out every week. Dave needed to understand that. With my self-deception intact, I devised a plan to regain control over Dave. However, Dave didn't comply. The next morning, as we all departed, he remained locked in the cellar, ignoring our attempts to reach him. The children grew concerned, but I reassured them that their father simply needed time to recover from his illness. Around lunchtime, a troubling thought crossed my mind. Had Dave harmed himself during the night? I decided to take the afternoon off and called a locksmith to meet me at our house. I explained that we had accidentally locked the basement door and didn't possess a key. It was astonishing how quickly he managed to open it. As I guided him to the front door, admiring his strength, I descended once again into the basement. Dave lay in the exact same position as when I had left him the night before. I leaned in and planted a kiss on his cheek, observing his face until I noticed him blink. With a whole night and day to contemplate, I began my defense. This time, I divulged the unvarnished truth, laying out everything: the impulses, the secret meetings, the movies, and even the cunning methods I had employed to minimize my, escapades. I reassured him of my unwavering love and continued commitment. Prior to returning home, I had resolved to conclude my defense there. I intended to sit back and allow Dave to unleash his fury upon me however he saw fit. Knowing Dave as well as I did, I anticipated a vehement outburst. But what I received was nothing. Absolutely nothing. He simply lay there, staring at the blank wall. Were it not for his faint breathing and occasional blink, he could have been mistaken for being lifeless. I nestled against his back, hoping to demonstrate my love through actions since words seemed futile. After 10 minutes of fruitless effort, I gave up, feeling somewhat foolish as he remained motionless. After getting the key, I left the basement and headed to our bedroom. Reclining on the bed, tears welled up in my eyes as I caught a glimpse of the immense pain Dave must be experiencing. It was clear this process would be lengthier than anticipated. Abruptly, the front door slammed shut. Hastening towards it, I heard the roar of Dave's car engine as he drove off. To spare him constant reminders, I collected all the DVDs from the basement and spent an hour finding a new hiding spot for them beneath the floorboards in my walk-in closet. By then, it was time to fetch the children. Dave returned home just as dinner was being served. He sat down and engaged with the kids, almost as if nothing had happened, yet he avoided making eye contact with me entirely. At 9:30, he excused himself and retreated to the basement. The children questioned if I had done something to upset their father, which was more distressing than anything else thus far. I feigned ignorance. After they had gone to bed, I spent 15 minutes preparing a coffee for Dave just the way he prefers it. With tray in hand, I attempted to open the basement door, only to find it locked once again. Using the key I had retrieved, I unlocked it. As I lifted the tray once more and pushed, I found it unyielding, pressing against the new bolt that Dave must have installed earlier. Despite my knocking and plaintive calls, there was no response. Feeling lost and unsure of what to do, I eventually retired to bed, where I cried myself to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, Dave was gone. After seeing the children off, I went down to the basement. I made Dave's bed and opened a small window at floor level to dispel the persistent, unpleasant smell. Our laptop was on the desk. When I opened the lid and brought him out of sleep mode, a website called The 9 Stages of Grief appeared on the screen. I looked through the initial 3 stages: shock, denial, anger, then moved on to the last one: acceptance. Tears came to my eyes when I imagined Dave anxiously trying to determine his progress and striving to reach the end. I really hope for his acceptance. It was with a heavy heart that I started my work today.
After stumbling into the basement 5 minutes after my marriage came to an end, I found myself incapable of doing anything but lying there, overwhelmed with emotion. As I heard Donna leave to pick up the kids, I retrieved the DVDs from beneath her dresser. Although I knew I wasn't mentally prepared to watch them yet, each one was labeled with numbers similar to the one I had glimpsed earlier. When the woman came downstairs, feigning concern for me, I was at a loss. Whether it was my unsettled stomach or her transparent lies, I couldn't contain my emotions and ended up vomiting after she left. Without trusting my voice, I simply opened the drawer to reveal her deceit. Though I felt a fleeting satisfaction in causing her distress when she screamed and fled, I remained on the floor. As I lay there, I heard the sound of the phone upstairs being answered. I picked up the handset and was met with a candid confession. "I'm sorry," I replied, unable to resist adding, "I just couldn't bring myself to say goodbye to Janet as well." The next morning, I dedicated my time to transferring all the DVDs onto my laptop. Reflecting on her proactive approach with the locksmith, I returned to my wounded state, anticipating her inevitable visit. Her complete confession didn't surprise me in the least. After all, what other option did she have? I waited for any sign of apology or remorse, only to be shocked when none came. Instead, she seemed oddly proud of something. As I processed this, she departed. Once her car was out of earshot, I ventured out, dropped off the hard drive backup at work, and purchased a deadbolt. Back home, I initially intended to retreat, but upon seeing my children, I feigned normalcy for their sake. Unable to rein in my anger, I ignored Donna. Retreating to my refuge, I turned to an internet search in an attempt to make sense of my emotions. Realizing I didn't fit into the conventional stages of mourning, I devised my own: anger, confusion, protect what's mine, revenge. Being decisive, by the 24-hour mark, I knew what needed to be done. Hence, I disregarded Donna's frantic pleas later. She was no longer a part of my plans. She had become irrelevant.
The following day, a Friday, marked the beginning of a new reality. Dave joined us for breakfast, seeming outwardly normal but distant, especially around the kids. Despite my attempts to engage him, he barely acknowledged my presence, going about his routine without a word or gesture of affection. I gave him the space I thought he needed to process everything. When he returned from work, it was more of the same. Even during the weekend, attending the kids' sports events and doing yard work as usual, there was no meaningful communication between us. Although I expressed my love for him whenever I could, it felt like a futile effort. The kids sensed something was wrong but didn't bring it up again. By the end of the following week, I reached my breaking point. I tried to have a heart-to-heart with Dave, laying bare my feelings and concerns. I even attempted to address our lack of intimacy, expressing my growing frustration. However, my efforts were met with silence as Dave continued to shut me out, walking away whenever I tried to talk to him. Another weekend passed with no resolution in sight. On Monday afternoon, I received a surprise. Janet called. She worked as the receptionist at the only law firm in town. Dave had called to schedule an appointment, and he was set to meet on Thursday. She also mentioned that her husband Reg had been acting strangely towards her lately. The news of Dave's appointment startled me. Could our marriage really be in such a bad state? Had Dave not listened to anything I'd said? Surely he knew I loved him and wanted a future together. I asked Janet to speak hypothetically to the best divorce lawyer to gauge Dave's potential advice. Janet called back before Dave returned with the lawyer's response. The advice would be that my conduct in the marriage didn't matter. Under a no-fault system, I would likely gain custody of the children, keep the family home, and receive the majority of our assets. Dave would be obligated to pay child support and alimony. Feeling reassured about Dave's commitment to our marriage after this revelation, and wanting to avoid public embarrassment, I relaxed and decided to give him the space to come to the same conclusion. Honestly, I didn't know what to say to him anyway. Life continued under the new normal. Dave took Thursday off, and I felt compelled to demonstrate my superiority and generally relaxed attitude by informing him that I was aware of his visit to a lawyer. I even summarized Janet's advice and encouraged him to accept the inevitable by forgiving me. As usual, he remained silent. At the end of the day, Janet called to inform me that she had been fired. Reading between the lines, Dave must have revealed that she had informed me about his appointment to her superiors, resulting in her dismissal for not being discreet. Naturally, I apologized but clarified that I hadn't requested her to inform me. I pledged to confront Dave about his selfish behavior, which was beginning to strain my relationships. However, that confrontation amounted to nothing. He simply ignored me upon returning home. Another uncomfortable weekend ensued. With the children away, I had hoped Dave would also leave for a while so I could, utilize my DVD collection as intended. Yet, he remained occupied with yard work the entire time. The tension, both in the house and within me, became unbearable. In an attempt to address the situation, I tried discussing his intentions, but he continued to ignore me. I even hinted that if he didn't fulfill his marital duties soon, I couldn't be held responsible for my actions. Still, there was no response. He carried on with his own tasks, oblivious to my concerns. Sunday saw my parents' visit, with Dave joining us briefly, appearing normal. Oddly, he never directly acknowledged me. Monday, he remained home as I headed to work. Tuesday, he beat me home. Suspicion brewed, yet I lacked clarity. Wednesday brought a glimmer of hope. Dave made eye contact, prompting a morning coffee together. I warned him, unless he snapped out of his funk, I'd embark on a trip solo tomorrow. Dread filled me at the thought, now that he was aware. After airing my concerns, Dave's response was silence. He left his coffee unfinished and departed for work. Upon his return, I sought his decision, only to be met with silence once more. Reiterating my love, I awaited his response, but none came. That night, I lay exposed, anticipating company, yet none arrived. Thursday. I reaffirmed my decision to Dave, being straightforward about my plan to bring a guy home that afternoon. Given his unpredictable work schedule, I asked him to avoid coming to the house until at least 6 p.m., ensuring the kids did the same. I reiterated the significance of bringing them home, emphasizing the camera situation. I assured him of my discretion. Dave remained silent, but I noticed his ears turning red from behind. I couldn't understand his anger. After all, it was his fault. The day went mostly according to plan. Instead of my usual pickiness, I settled on the first guy who agreed, although our meeting lacked the usual lightness and ease. The constant feeling of awkwardness did not leave me, preventing me from having fun. I ended the relationship prematurely by deciding to watch one of my favorite home movies alone. An idea struck me. Perhaps asking Dave to watch these films together could demonstrate a lack of emotional attachment. I rarely even kiss these men. Who knows, maybe he'll even like it. If only I could summon up the courage to share these films with Dave, everything would almost go back to normal. Having exhausted my strength, I took a shower and cooked Dave's favorite dish, putting extra effort into it.
It took me nearly 2 weeks to set up the meeting. Based on what Donna had disclosed to me and from overhearing my phone call with Janet, I understood she believed I had only 2 choices: either continue to passively accept her lifestyle or face ruin and public humiliation through divorce. Neither option was acceptable to me. I knew she wouldn't even consider my third alternative. Instead of desperately hiding her behavior, I planned to expose it to the world. Rather than feeling ashamed, the only mistake I saw was loving Donna to the point of utter naivety. The meeting was scheduled for tonight. I had invited her parents, mine, all our friends and neighbors, some of her colleagues, and even other parents from the children's sports groups. I had rented a small hall for about 60 people and arranged catering. Initially, I had wanted to shield the kids from the pain, but Donna's actions forced me to involve them by making me responsible for keeping them away from the house until 6 p.m. I left work early to pick them up from school, and we passed the time by grabbing a bite at a local burger joint. I found myself unsure of how to approach the topic with them, and I suppose I hesitated a bit. However, my concern was unnecessary as Kate broke the silence. Casting a glance at John, she began, "Dad, is this about Mom cheating on you?" My jaw hit the table, figuratively speaking. After regaining my composure, I simply nodded. "We were wondering when you'd figure it out." They then reluctantly recounted how they had unexpectedly come home to find their mom occupied on more than one occasion. While they never directly witnessed anything, the noises were unmistakable. Surprisingly, They were unaware of the DVDs. They assumed that every time they heard noises behind the closed bedroom door and their mom screamed, there was another man involved. I clarified the situation for them. Both looked visibly disturbed when I explained that I had discovered the truth and that the reason I had picked them up today was because Donna had informed me of her intentions and instructed me to keep them occupied until she was finished. Kate tearfully recounted how 3 months prior she had confronted her mother, pleading with her to cease her actions. Her mother appeared visibly ashamed and concerned, promising to cease everything in exchange for Kate's silence. Trusting her mother's word, Kate believed the ordeal was over and the threat of family disintegration averted. Both children wept as they confessed that they had wanted to tell me about the situation before the confrontation 3 months ago, but lacked the courage. They acknowledged that no reasonable person could condone their mother's behavior and willingly agreed to accompany me that night. Ironically, their presence provided reassurance. Due to late arrivals, the meeting didn't commence until nearly 7:30 p.m., leaving attendees puzzled about the purpose. After everyone was settled and fed, I began my PowerPoint presentation. The reaction was beyond astonishment. When I displayed still images from the DVDs, I asked the children to leave the room. I showed only the necessary minimum to convey that Donna was a repeat offender. Some in the audience recognized traveling representatives who had their own businesses. Overall, the situation was less embarrassing than expected. After my presentation ended, I waited for the commotion to settle. Their astonishment only grew when I revealed that despite being aware of her actions, Donna had repeated them that day. As I outlined my intentions, they all nodded vigorously. Reg had been a valuable source of support. I had briefed him last week. 2 single women from the neighborhood, one widowed and one divorced, were particularly friendly. Naturally, Donna's parents took it the hardest, offering apologies incessantly and expressing concern for the kids' well-being. Donna's father lingered, the last to leave after others had dispersed, some with copies of the presentation. He inquired about the possibility of salvaging our marriage. 2 days prior, I would have answered with a resounding no. However, yesterday's realization that Donna might be suffering from a serious mental illness made me reconsider. Despite the severity of her actions, my vows compelled me to support her if she showed genuine remorse and sought treatment for a diagnosed condition. Yet I harbored doubts about this possibility. Our family doctor sat in the second row during the presentation. Surely he would have intervened if there were medical concerns.
At 6:45 p.m., dinner was prepared, but I found myself puzzled by the absence of everyone. Attempts to reach Dave, John, and Kate on their mobiles proved futile. I tried contacting Kate and John's usual Thursday afternoon hangout spot, but received no response. Calls to both my and Dave's parents' home, and mobile phones went unanswered as well. Janet was unhelpful, resorting to name-calling before abruptly ending the call. What could be the cause of all this? Finally, in a state of desperation, I drove to all our typical gathering spots, yet they were nowhere to be found. I got home a little after 10 p.m. Dave's car was parked in the driveway, and the basement door was locked again. After checking on the children, who seemed to be asleep, I went downstairs. I noticed a laptop near the front door. After uploading, I was greeted by a slide called Discussion. By pressing the escape key, a series of photos appeared on the left side of the screen. Clicking on one of them, my heart sank. It was a photo from proving my infidelity. This was followed by 2 more photos depicting similar encounters with different men, one of which was from the terrible Disc 11. That day, I brought 2 men home, indulging in my fantasy. And it didn't end well for me. This ordeal traumatized me, deterring me from such meetings for several months. Despite the fact that I saved a CD with evidence of all the terrible things that happened there, I did not dare to go to the police. The fear of exposing myself, including in front of Dave, held me back. It suddenly dawned on me where Dave had been all evening. But surely he wouldn't expose himself like that, would he? Publicly admitting his cuckoldry to everyone. I concurred with Janet. It would be social suicide for someone as prominent in the community as Dave. But what other explanation could there be? I was bewildered to the point of disbelief. How could Dave disrespect me by airing our private matters in public? If he continued at this pace, he risked losing me. Then a troubling thought crossed my mind. Until now, I had only considered the impact of public exposure on Dave. Who else knew? Most people hearing that a woman had slept with 28 men in 3 years would label her as promiscuous. They were unaware of the full context, unaware that I was merely seeking solace discreetly to salvage my marriage. Feeling numb, I went to bed. My mind consumed with one question. Why would Dave do this? If he wasn't concerned about public humiliation, then the only thing keeping our marriage intact was his fear of losing his home, his children, and the savings we had diligently accumulated. What if he displayed the same indifference towards those too? For the first time, I contemplated the possibility that our marriage was in grave jeopardy. It was around 4 a.m. when I finally managed to drift off to sleep. The next morning, I woke up feeling incredibly groggy at 8:15. My laptop was in the same place as I had left it the night before, and the house was deserted. Despite stumbling through my morning routine, I managed to make it to work only 15 minutes late. Rushing so much, I didn't even notice that the first 2 people I greeted didn't respond. Sitting at my desk, I resumed working on the tasks I hadn't finished on Wednesday. It wasn't until morning tea that I began to sense something was off. While some of my colleagues were as friendly as ever, others completely ignored me. Attributing it to the typical Friday mood, I brushed it off. During lunch, I headed to the sandwich shop where I usually met my friends, but none of them were there. I ended up having lunch alone. I tried calling 3 of them, but none answered. Not dwelling on it, I returned to work. However, this time, the atmosphere was markedly different. No one acknowledged my presence upon my return. An hour later, one of the bosses emerged and looked around the silent room in confusion. After dropping some handwritten notes in my inbox, he returned to his office. I attempted to strike up conversations with my coworkers, but they simply continued typing, ignoring me. Feeling bewildered, I returned home as the day drew to a close. Once again, the house stood empty, devoid of people and cars. As I roamed about, I noticed that all the camping equipment had vanished. The absence of my companions on the camping trip hit me hard. It felt like a betrayal. No one picked up their phones when I called, not even Janet, who seemed to have distanced herself for reasons unknown. Turning to other friends for support, the first 2 didn't answer, but the husband of the third did. We exchanged a few words before he abruptly said he'd fetch his wife. Upon his return after 2 minutes, he tersely informed me she wasn't available and promptly ended the call. It left me with an unsettling feeling of strangeness. Realizing what an unexpected opportunity I had, I went to the closet and took out my collection. By choosing number 18, which has always been one of my favorites, while watching this movie, I found myself closing my eyes and imagining Dave lying with me. Despite all this guy's talents, Dave was still the best. In fact, he was good at everything. I was relieved for a moment when I thought Dave and I were watching a movie together, but reality ruined that too. As a result, I couldn't completely relax and I gave up and decided to just sleep. The next day, I tried again with number 23. Disappointed and disgusted, I gave up trying. After the shower, I decided to visit my mom, knowing that she was always a good listener. On the way, I was thinking about how much to tell, given her traditional views. What happened was simply shocking. When I arrived, Dad opened the door, but he seemed to act as if no one was there. To my horror, he disappeared inside and slammed the door in my face. Caught off guard, I noticed Mom peeking out from behind the curtains, tears streaming down her face. All I could do was hobble to my car. Leaning over the steering wheel, I not only caught a glimpse of a bleak future, but also penetrated a part of Dave's soul that I had never guessed about. I felt the determination and bravery that must have been required to trust anyone, let alone my parents. Frantically, I called my brother to no avail. Attempting my sister next, she picked up only to promptly disconnect upon hearing my voice. In a town of 5,000 residents, solitude seemed implausible, yet Dave had achieved just that. Over the span of 24 hours, not a single friend or family member reached out, save for my mother's fleeting glance. Returning home, I succumbed to tears until sleep overtook me. Awakening with a revelation on Sunday morning, I realized there was one place where acceptance was obligatory. I dressed for church, where the pastor typically greeted congregants at the entrance. He pulled me aside. "Donna, as much as it pains me, you're not welcome here today," he whispered. "Several parishioners have threatened to leave if you enter. I must prioritize the congregation's needs over the few. However, my dear, Feel free to return later, and I'll be here to listen to your confession. I fled in ultimate humiliation. I have no recollection of my actions for the next few hours, but I returned to church. Father Riley suggested we converse outside the confessional, so we sat on one of the pews. I confessed to the sin of adultery, without delving into specifics. I was only beginning to grasp the magnitude of my wrongdoing, and struggled to admit it, even to myself. The Reverend Father waited until it was clear I had nothing more to add before speaking. My daughter, before you return to truly confess your sins, you must fulfill 2 tasks, he said. Firstly, you must commit to acknowledging all your transgressions, not only to God, but also to yourself. Secondly, you must genuinely feel remorseful. Only then should you seek absolution. I must caution you, even then I harbor doubts. If even a fraction of what I've heard is true, you may be deeply guilty of the deadly sin of lust. As you're aware, the deadly sins corrupt body and soul irreparably and are beyond my power to absolve. I'm not sure if he continued talking or not. When I regained consciousness, I found myself back at home. Everywhere I turned, I felt the weight of what I had done sinking in, challenging the illusions I had held. One thing I was certain of: if Dave had confided in so many people, he wouldn't hesitate to end our marriage. With newfound determination, I shifted into damage control mode. I resolved to consult a lawyer the next day. While checking our recent bank transactions online, I noticed our balances seemed unusually low. Retrieving the latest statements from the filing cabinet, I quickly realized that about half of our money was missing. Oddly, rather than sparking anger, this realization that Dave was one step ahead of me fueled a solemn determination to salvage our marriage. I couldn't allow Dave's stubbornness to jeopardize our children's future happiness. I decided to shoulder some of the blame for our rift and appeal to his mercy.
It wasn't exactly a laid-back camping trip, but we did manage to squeeze in a bit of fun. On the way back home, I attempted to persuade John and Kate to be more understanding towards their mother, but they were both firm in their opinions, being old enough to hold strong views. Giving up on that front, I shared my thoughts, which proved to be quite cathartic. I expressed that if their mother truly regretted her actions and the blatant disrespect she had shown us, I would urge her to seek assistance. If, after treatment, a professional could confirm she had a recognized disorder and convincingly demonstrate her recovery, then I would reluctantly consider forgiving her. After all, I had made vows before God to stand by her in sickness and in health. If she was unwell, then I believed I owed her compassion rather than anger. I took those vows seriously. With a mix of anxiety and a faint glimmer of hope, we pulled into the garage and entered the house. The kids hurriedly carried their bags upstairs, barely acknowledging Donna, who looked wild-eyed. Had I not known her for almost half her life, I might have passed her on the street without recognizing her. She approached and clung to me, making me feel extremely uncomfortable. However, pushing her away like I did on the first day was out of the question. That would be unforgivable. After she finished sobbing, she finally spoke. "I deeply regret it, my love. I'm truly sorry you had to find out like this." Unaware of my sudden tension, she continued, "Of course, if you can't handle it, I'll stop traveling out of town." Her words were so far from what I had hoped for that I was left speechless and immobile. "Please come upstairs, we can watch a movie or more if you want. Let me prove to you that I haven't emotionally invested in anyone else but you. Then make love to me and reassure me that we'll be okay. Please." They say every man has a breaking point, and this was mine. The final straw. Pushing Donna away abruptly, I turned and fled into the basement, struggling against the sudden urge for violence threatening to overwhelm me.
Dave's response shocked me. I had given my best effort. After taking a moment to collect myself, I approached to check on how the children's weekend had gone. They were behind locked doors and refused to respond to my knocks. Oh no, Dave had influenced them too. I felt so frustrated that I wanted to scream. Once again, I cried myself to sleep. The next morning, I woke up just in time to see Dave leaving. He had prepared breakfast and packed lunches for the kids. Clearly, they were both rushing through breakfast to leave as soon as possible. John had a blank expression, ignoring my presence entirely. Kate, on the other hand, had tears in her eyes as she reluctantly followed John out. She lingered behind a bit, her eyes pleading as she spoke. "Mom, Please seek help for your condition before it's too late. What? What are you talking about? What condition? She simply shook her head with a hint of sadness before turning away. That marked the end of my encounter with them for the week. I presumed they had gone to stay at Dave's parents' house, where I knew I wouldn't find any sympathy. As I followed my usual morning routine, I switched on the coffee machine to let it warm up. Resting against it was a letter with just Donna written on the front. I couldn't resist opening it.
Donna, until last night, I was willing to make efforts to salvage our marriage for the sake of our children and the commitment I made to you on our wedding day. However, you revealed that the gap between my expectations and your mindset is too vast to bridge. A successful relationship relies on the 3 pillars of love, trust, and respect. If one of these is compromised, the foundation collapses, but sometimes it can be rebuilt. However, you have shattered all 3. Your actions indicate a lack of love, as someone who loves wouldn't behave in such a manner. Hatred is the opposite of love, and your actions suggest you harbor hatred towards me, considering the extent to which you've hurt me. Respect's antithesis is contempt. Your actions have demonstrated disdain toward me, our family, our marriage vows, and my well-being. It's a wonder I haven't contracted an STD from you. It's inconceivable to maintain honesty with someone you truly respect. You seem to expect me to accept your infidelity, even to the extent of watching movies with you. You should understand that I firmly believe any man who derives pleasure from seeing his wife with another man forfeits both her respect and his own self-respect. Additionally, you displayed contempt by entertaining the notion of using public exposure as leverage against me. As for trust, it's a topic I won't delve into. You've strayed so far from the person I once knew that I can never trust you again. Donna, as you're aware, I consider myself a compassionate person. Hence, I'm inclined to believe that you may be grappling with mental health challenges. A rational individual would have acknowledged the gravity of their actions and expressed remorse, which you haven't done. I've explored the possibility of seeking legal or medical intervention for your well-being, but haven't found a viable solution. Therefore, I strongly encourage you to seek help for yourself. Evaluate your behavior not based on your current standards, but by the values you held 3 years ago, the Donna I knew. By now, you surely understand that I eliminated the risk of you exposing me as unfaithful by revealing it myself. I disclosed this to our close circle of friends, family, and acquaintances, granting them permission to spread the news. Your only remaining threat is to take our children home and assets. I require the house and assets to care for our children. Once I remove you from our lives completely, shielding them from your harmful influence. Consequently, I've secured our finances and you'll be served with legal papers today to cut ties with you. My earnest wish is for you to remove yourself entirely until you've healed. When you've recovered, we can assess the situation optimistically together with our children. Please depart quietly. You've caused turmoil in both our lives, but there's still hope for John and Kate. Kindly comprehend that I haven't made these decisions lightly. Up until last night, I was open to collaboration. However, circumstances led me to a definitive choice. As you're aware, I prioritize simplifying life into basic duties. At its core, my responsibility is to provide sustenance, shelter, and security for my children and then for you. Regrettably, I now face the distressing task of shielding my children from your harmful influence. In the coming week, you'll observe my unwavering commitment to their protection. Dave.
Well, what was that all about? Of course, I still loved, trusted, and respected Dave. Why does he think I'm sticking around and putting up with all this cold shoulder behavior? Wasn't I giving him space to snap out of his funk? It sounded like our marriage was hitting a rough patch, but nothing that couldn't be resolved if he just talked to me. Suddenly, I spun around when I heard a voice behind me yelling, "Snap out of it!" There was no one there. Confused, I wondered why it sounded like my own voice. I realized I was avoiding the truth as I busied myself getting ready for work. When I got there this time, absolutely no one acknowledged me. I cleared out my inbox and waited for more work. The other girls were busy, with a constant stream of tasks coming their way. Meanwhile, mine remained empty. I tried to get the attention of the next manager who came out with work, but he just passed me by. To illustrate, I sat down and perused the newspaper. In the middle, there was a notice stating that Reginald Smith would no longer be liable for debts incurred by Janet Smith. It seemed Janet's marriage was in trouble too, for some undisclosed reason. Upon entering the lunchroom to enjoy my sandwich, Everyone promptly departed, displaying a childish behavior that grew increasingly irritating. The afternoon stretched on tediously. At 5 p.m., I headed straight home. As promised, Dave's process server awaited me. I calmly reviewed the documents, which demanded I vacate the premises within 24 hours, among other legal jargon. He did agree to cover reasonable expenses, particularly medical ones, though his insistence on this matter annoyed me. Once again, I sensed a presence behind me vying for my attention in an otherwise empty room. Later on, I came to understand that I couldn't confront reality, so I fell back on my daily routine. Recognizing it was my shopping day, I drove to the grocery store, filled my cart, and queued at the checkout. I waited patiently, but just as it was my turn, the cashier closed the register and left. I had to put everything back and join the line again, only to face the same situation. Frustrated, I approached the duty manager, but he brushed me off. Feeling angry and embarrassed, I stormed out. When I returned home, Dave was there, and I unleashed my frustration on him, blaming him for everything. He ignored me. That was the breaking point. The next day, I called the lawyer's office. I explained that they were already representing my husband, and the new receptionist informed me that due to our small town's rules, another partner could represent me. There was only one other partner handling divorces, and she promised to have him reach out to me. I sat beside the phone, pondering the extent of my generosity towards David. He hardly warranted much. An hour later, the phone finally rang. Upon verifying my identity, the lawyer's words were stark. "Ma'am, as a lawyer, my metaphorical barge pole extends to 15 feet compared to the standard 10. Yet, even with that length, I wouldn't dare touch you. Goodbye." Leaving work, no one seemed to notice. I roamed the streets, seeking recognition or empathy in every familiar face I encountered. One acquaintance approached, only to be pulled away by her friend. I entered 3 different shops, yet I might as well have been invisible. Eventually, I found myself outside the bar. Desperate for human connection, I entered and took a seat. It was no surprise when the bartender, whom I had befriended, paid me no mind. Eventually, a man approached and struck up a conversation with me, clearly not from around here. Relieved to encounter someone who acknowledged my presence, I engaged in conversation with him. About 5 minutes in, he offered to buy me a drink, which I graciously accepted. As I observed him heading to the bar, the bartender leaned in and conversed with him. They chatted for approximately 4 minutes, with the man frequently stealing glances at me. It was incredibly awkward. Eventually, the man left through the door and vanished. With my last hope dashed, I followed suit shortly after, returning to town. Retrieving my car, I drove away. I vaguely recall attempting to call my mother, but after 6 rings, the call disconnected before reaching voicemail. The next thing I remember is that I woke up in my car. Through the window, I saw the rising sun and the sprawling green fields. I had no idea where I was, but obviously it was a long way from home. The disturbing nightmare that I woke up from came flooding back to me, making me shudder. In my dream, I was in bed, and I was attacked by a faceless stranger. Familiar faces gathered in the room. Dave, my children, parents, friends, colleagues, and even one of my managers, and they all shook their heads disapprovingly. Eventually, a figure similar to my younger version approached the bed, with some kind of weapon in his hands, which made my partner disappear. Feeling embarrassed, I tucked my legs under me. The younger version of me held out her hand, which Dave took. They both looked down at me with smiles, turning out to be the epitome of the perfect couple, making me jealous. And then my other self spoke up. "All right, now that I have your attention, let's talk. There are 2 scenarios to consider here. The first possibility is that Dave and your children are mistaken. In that case, it means your parents, friends, co-workers, and everyone else present here are also mistaken. The alternative is..." "That I am mistaken," I interjected. She nodded in agreement. Simultaneously, the rest of the audience nodded along. With that realization, my final illusions faded away. I finally saw myself as others did. It wasn't a pleasant revelation. "Doctor, I believe that's when my descent into madness began." "Well done, Donna. Your progress is commendable. There are just a few more evaluations to go through, and if you pass them, I believe we can propose to the board that you be discharged next month. That would mark 2 months shy of 3 years since your admission here." Dr. Mike, has it truly been such a long time? Yes, Donna, it has. Now, Donna, we've reached the furthest point in your treatment so far. So, tell me, where do you envision living once you transition back to the outside world? Well, I'll move back in with Dave and the kids, of course. I'm sure the house is a wreck, and the kids are running wild. Dave wouldn't manage without me organizing everything. The senior resident closed his eyes for a duration 6 times longer than a typical blink. Why couldn't he ever progress beyond this stage? Sorry, Donna, that's not going to work, remember? Why wouldn't it, Doctor? Dave still loves me, doesn't he? Do you not recall, Donna? Dave came to visit a month ago. He brought his new wife, Julia, with him. Surely you remember that. Mike sighed and pushed the intercom button. Raising his voice over the hysterical screams, he instructed, "Barney, please bring the jacket in." He had been optimistic about the straightforward approach this time. Truly, he had. What should he attempt next time?